It's sickle to come dash your hopes and dreams of your college football playoff or your New Year's Six Bowl. Nobody is safe.
I got a feel-good story for you.
What else do you want the man to do?
We're counting down the best plays. How do you define success?
George Wrighster.
I'm here to tell you that no matter how much you're favored by, if your college football team doesn't bring their A game, if they turn over the football, they can find themselves in the midst of a nail biter. And then when you get in them games, it's one wrong bounce of the football, an uncharacteristic play from a normally sure-handed wide receiver, a running back that never fumbles, a quarterback that makes good decisions. All of a sudden he makes a bonehead play, snap, hits a guy motioning across. It don't matter. And if you play on the edge long enough, upset season will find you in its crosshairs. And this week, in week 10, we saw several teams actually lose their shot at a college football playoff bid. And then we had a few survivors whose fans are just sitting there sweating the whole time. And we're going to start with Texas because their fans absolutely have to be sweating. The last time that they actually had one of those games was a few weeks ago against Houston. And there was going to be some anticipation of, possibly struggling or not looking perfect with their starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, out. But they still managed to pull the game off. And then they have young, talented quarterback in Malik Murphy, who, if Ewers were to declare for the NFL draft, that he would potentially be the next heir apparent. You got Ark Manning. So this team at quarterback position appears to be, in a good spot. But Malik Murphy is talented. And Texas is breaking in this new young quarterback in their most important part of the season. They already survived Kansas State at home this weekend after the Wildcats scored 16 points in the fourth quarter to force overtime. But the biggest question in the game was about Chris Klieman, who's Kansas State's head coach, whether he should have gone for two in that situation or instead of, kicking a field goal and going into double overtime. I love the call. You're on the road. You're playing against a team who is better than you in terms of, recruiting rankings and all that sort of stuff. And you go win. Like, if you can tell coaches, I got to get 2.5 yards to win a game, and that's it. Yes. If you told Chris Klieman that before the game, he would have said, sign me up. No question about it. Where do I sign the contract? Because I will actually take this, because this is one of those times where it is hard to win. It is extremely hard to win. And 2.5 yards with the way your offense had been doing. But at the end of the day, Texas was able to get a stop. And the question is, though, if you are Kansas State, you have revisionist history, would you go back and do the exact same thing? I believe yes. But like in most of these situations, the coaches say, damn, I wish I would have called a better play. And that's probably the same there. But on the Texas side, is Texas finally back? Like, can we acknowledge them as back? Because this is their best start to a season since 2009. And this was actually a huge win for Sark, their head coach, Steve Sarkisian, who has 7 wins for the multiple time in his career, so much so that he had been deemed in, joke circles as 7-win Sark. And then he was able to do it last week to get the win with Quinn Ewers going out. This week, not even starting Quinn Ewers. And now he's 2 weeks away and 2 wins away from his first double-digit winning season. Now, when you look at what they have left on their schedule with TCU, Iowa State, and Texas Tech, it looks manageable, but it is upset season. You cannot take any of these games for granted. Now, on to our next survivor, though. Next survivor is Ole Miss, who they stopped Texas A&M from sending the game into overtime by blocking that field goal. Now, this game was interesting, though, because Texas A&M is just good enough to beat Ole Miss. In terms of talent on the field, Texas A&M, their star ratings and all this are much higher than Ole Miss's. And this is part of the frustration, which we'll get into with Texas A&M fans. But Ole Miss was the better coach team. They had They got good quarterback play out of Jackson Dart. And this was one of those sandwich games because Ole Miss has to go play Georgia next week. And this was a game that they clearly could have overlooked, but they found a way to win against a talented team. You had Lane Kiffin on game day talking about he was hoping that this would be a rat poison game, but Nick Saban had already stole that. Then you had Texas A&M. Like, this could have been a trap game for them. Actually, it probably was a trap game for them over at Ole Miss, but they found a way to pull it out because they could have been looking ahead to Georgia next week in a game that could actually flip the SEC on its head. Because when you look at teams that are vying for playoff spots, Georgia, with the way the SEC is shaping up, thank God for the SEC that Alabama won last week, because if they had lost to LSU and then you're facing a Georgia team this week that could play Ole Miss, if Ole Miss can actually win that football game, now all of a sudden that puts so much pressure on the Georgia-Tennessee game. Not necessarily for Georgia getting into the SEC championship game, but more so when it comes to college football playoff spots and positioning, because Georgia has had the benefit of the last couple of years of playing close to home. They could end up in the Rose Bowl. It could really change a lot of things. But I want to focus on Ole Miss for a second, because Ole Miss is now 3-0 in games that they've given up 300 yards passing it, and 5-0 in games where the defense has surrendered at least 150 yards rushing. And when we talk about championships and defense and all of that, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the question is, how are they getting away with it? And that was the part that they weren't able to get away with in the game against Bama. But they've been getting away with it by taking care of the ball on offense and then forcing turnovers on defense. Because on the year, they're +8. 14 turnovers to only 6 giveaways. These are the things that are leading Ole Miss to have a chance, to have a legitimate shot. Now they need Bama to take a L. They're going to be praying in the Iron Bowl and all these other games that are coming up, just saying, please let them lose. So the way they can get a shot at probably Georgia in the SEC championship. Now, on the other side of the coin in this game, you had Texas A&M. And these are the exact kind of games that they were expecting Jimbo Fisher to win when they gave him a $75 million contract to leave Florida State, to only turn that into a $100 million plus contract when they gave him an extension when nobody else was going to take him away from them, which made no sense. That's a whole nother thing. But the question at this point is, if you're Texas A&M and you still owe Jimbo $60, $70 plus million, how do you handle this? And I have 2 rules, because so many A&M fans are calling for Jimbo Fisher to be fired. And I have long stated that I have 2 rules for firing coaches. 2, that's it. That's how you know whether you should fire your coach or not. Number 1, every single coach at the end of the season, whether you went undefeated or whether you went defeated. And undefeated, obviously, you win the championship, you hoist the trophy, everything. And defeated is if you go 0-12. 0-12, don't win a game. Every single coach, from the championship coach down to the 0-12 coach, needs to be evaluated. And the question that you need to ask is 2 things. Number 1, is there for sure a coach that I can get that is better than the coach that I have now, that will do a better job than the coach I have right now? For instance, if you're Ole Miss, of course you're happy with what Lane Kiffin is doing right now. But if you have the chance to hire Nick Saban, hell yeah, you are going to fire him. So that's why the 12-0 coach or the championship coach needs to be evaluated as well. And then the second and probably most important rule is there a loss of hope? Can you go into 17 to 21-year-old for between high school and JUCO households and sell those kids and their parents that the future is brighter than the past? And if you can't do that, if there's a loss of hope in the locker room about the future or in recruiting, then coach got to go. So if you can't answer those two things, that you can't get a better coach and that there's no loss of hope, then you need to keep your coach. Because so many fans call for coaches to be fired prematurely. They call for them to be fired when they don't have a sensible replacement, or they want them fired in the middle of the season. Is firing him in the middle of the season going to help you out? I mean, if you're trying to get a coach that's sitting on the couch that won't talk to you. But aside from that, no, not really. Now, let's go on to teams this week that had tests, that passed their tests. You had Washington beat USC 52-42. Alabama beat LSU 48-28. Now, I got a trivia question for you. If I had asked you which one of those four teams gave up the most yards in the first half, talking about Alabama versus LSU, USC, Washington, who would you have guessed? Who would you have guessed? Now, the answer is, of course, it is USC, because we've been lamenting USC's defense all season. They gave up 333 yards in the first half of their game against Washington. You might think, well, George, that was an easy answer. But was it, though? Because Alabama gave up 323 yards in the first half to LSU. Washington gave up 268, and LSU gave up 270. So that's a total of almost 1,200 yards at 1194 on teams that are supposed to be potential championship contenders. Bro, that's a lot of damn yards. Now, the other teams that passed their tests, you had Georgia beat Missouri, which that's a real test, 30-21, because Missouri's still a very good football team. And you looked at if Drinkowitz and this crew are able to continue to recruit at a high level, Missouri is going to get respect in the SEC, which is what they want, which is what people act like that they don't want to give them. You have Michigan tear up Purdue 41-13. Didn't appear that there were signs stolen there. Ohio State 35-19 over Rutgers. Florida State beat Pitt without some of their best players, including Johnny Wilson. You had Louisville take care of business. They beat Virginia Tech 34-3. Now, that's a sneaky team. Now, I want everybody to point out and watch Louisville because they are led by Jack Plummer at quarterback. This is a sneaky team. This is a team that could upset Florida State in the ACC championship. And with their lone loss to Pittsburgh, who Florida State just beat 24-7 this weekend, people are going to, and have only won, 2 or 3 games this year. People are going to be looking at this team very curiously, particularly if there's more chaos at the top, in the top 10 of the playoff rankings, because you're going to have a couple teams fall out this week, where this Louisville team finds itself. And then you also had Oregon absolutely boat racing Cal 63-19, which was, I mean, it was expected, but damn. And on to the next, because you had two teams that saw their already slim college football playoff hopes go into smoke thanks to upset season, coming out with the sickle. Everything got to go. You had Oklahoma and Notre Dame. And we talked about earlier playing with fire. And Oklahoma has been playing with fire for a while now. Barely winning against UCF. Then they lost to Kansas. And then on Saturday, they lost what could be some bragging rights in the final Bedlam game, for at least for a while. They got picked apart on defense by multiple-time transfer quarterback Alan Bowman. And I'm a message board lurker. Don't go in and really comment on them, but I go in there to see what fans are talking about. And not just the stuff that gets posted on Twitter or message board geniuses. No, I'm going in there, I'm deep diving, especially after losses. I need to see how fans react. And fans are so reactionary that it's wild. But Oklahoma fans, they got some solace. Because yes, they are happy with Brent Venables. They love Brent Venables. And I put out a video a few weeks ago. I believe that this team is better off with Brent Venables than they were long-term with Lincoln Riley. But in the microwave era of college football and, our expectations in life, a 9-3 or a 10-2 season is not going to quench Oklahoma's thirst. They're like, we need to win national championships. And you're probably on your way, but it's just not going to happen overnight. Progress, not perfection. Defenses looks much better than it did last year. Offense looks better. You're moving in the right direction, and you got a young, little hot shot quarterback that's a freshman this year that you can believe in for the future as well. So this team is headed in the right direction. And their fans were upset on the message boards. And of course, anytime you lose a game, especially when you feel like you should win in a rivalry game against Oklahoma State, and you feel like our coach is better than what they got over there with Gundy. It was actually comforting, though, for the Oklahoma fans to see the turmoil going on at USC. Oh, Lord. That was, even though they had the Bedlam loss, they could look over there and be like, hey, we're still better than those guys. We're still better than what's going on at USC because there's turmoil. And the tides can quickly turn on coaches. And that's the same thing that has happened in Stillwater, Oklahoma this year with Mike Gundy. Because after starting their season off, everybody was giving Mike Gundy a side eye. And particularly me, I definitely was. And now they find themselves in a position to win the Big 12 after struggling against Central Arkansas and Arizona State to start the season. And then losing to South Alabama after being, that was by 4 touchdowns. Losing to South Alabama? Well, yeah, bro, not it. And then the Cowboys got wrecked in the transfer portal this year. Started the season 2-2. So now Mike Gundy is getting looked at by fans like, hey, yo, partner, what's up? What's up? Do we have to figure out a new situation over here? But now they have a real shot at 10-2 and a spot in the Big 12 championship, which is going to make their fans extremely happy, particularly since they got the last lick against Oklahoma while Oklahoma's hightailing it out to the SEC. And it just goes to show you that the season is long and that there is a lot of value in not just a college football playoff, that there's value in the season. There's value in the development. There's value in the process. Because you don't know if this season sets you up and the way that you've handled this to have the right transfers come in, to have the right NIL donors or to motivate the fan base. Like, hey, yo, let's invest in this a little bit. Oh, got to make good choices. Now, the last upset that I want to talk about actually shouldn't even be, I'm not even sure if it should technically even be considered an upset. But Clemson was reeling. And then this week it ended up Dabo versus everybody, and his team responded. But this win actually over Notre Dame actually makes Dabo at the coach of Clemson, their all-time wins leader at head coach. And they probably keep him from having to yell at Tyler from Spartanburg on his coach's radio show this week in an attempt to justify his salary. So this was a big win for them. But at 2-4 against the ACC, what else are we supposed to call them beating a ranked Notre Dame except an upset? You wouldn't call Clemson Notre Dame, like if you just say those two brands, you don't think of that as an upset. Especially when Notre Dame is coming into Death Valley with 2 losses. If I told you that at the beginning of the season, all right, Notre Dame, when they go play Clemson, they're going to have 2 losses, and we're going to be calling this an upset. And Cade Klubnik has played in all the games. Dabo Swinney didn't quit in the middle of the season. You would have said, wait, hold up. How does that make sense? 2 losses, and this is still an upset? Yes, because Clemson has 4. And Clemson has clearly fallen off a little bit this season. But if we're honest, they're still only 1 season removed from 11 wins and an undefeated ACC record. But now they're sitting at 5-4, running an offense that's making their second straight 5-star quarterback look average. And that's Cade Klubnik and DJ Uiagalelei, who is doing a good job over at Oregon State. So now their fans are like, yo, what's really going on? And even in this win against Notre Dame, there are still offensive concerns because Clemson's 4.1 yards per play, that was their lowest since 2021 in their season opener against Georgia. And I'll tell you, though, that styles make fights in college football. They absolutely do. Because Notre Dame has been in rock fights all season. Their offense has not looked stellar, even with their transfer quarterback from Wake Forest. It hasn't looked stellar, hasn't looked top tier. Their defense has been good enough, but their offense hasn't. And Marcus Freeman, their head coach, he's got to find some consistency from week to week on that offensive side of the ball. But Notre Dame fans do need to realize that he only needs one more win to have more wins than Brian Kelly did in his first 2 years at Notre Dame. So while you're upset about it, I get it. You got to calm down and you got to be realistic because more wins than Brian Kelly and he did a good job at Notre Dame. But I also want to tell you guys, if you have not been following my college football picks against the spread, if you have not been following my college football picks against the spread, you have been missing out. They come out on Thursdays on YouTube, Twitter, everywhere else where you can follow me there at George Wrighster. Now, this week, my picks went 4-1. And on the season, I'm 29, 13-3. That's 64% winners, 71% that you're at least getting your money back. Come on, man. Why are you not following this? And in case you missed the video, I had North Carolina State plus 4.5 at home against Miami. Boom, winner, check. Missouri plus 15.5 at Georgia. Boom, winner, check. You have Maryland plus 10 at home versus Penn State. Listen, I don't know what Maryland was doing, but listen. And we also had Oregon minus 24 versus Cal. That felt amazing to me. 24 versus Cal. Yes. I was like, if everybody else is putting up 50 points on Cal, yeah, Oregon will not be giving them 25. It ain't happening. And my lock of the week this week, I finally, because everybody all season have been playing around with Colorado, and I have stayed away from Colorado pretty much all season. But I finally got this team figured out. And when they were playing against Oregon State, they were plus 13.5. And I was like, yo, sign me up, baby. Sign me up. And your boy is a winner. So make sure that you guys follow those up, which will be out on Thursday. Now, I want to talk about USC, their defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, and Mr. Caleb Williams, because these people have to be talked about. Now, Caleb Williams, in this game, in their loss to Washington, 52-42, this over-under was 76. And when I looked at that this week, I was like, what, 76? The over-under should probably be like 90. Like, there was no way that USC wasn't going to be able to score some points because Washington's defense is it's not great. And USC's defense has been a sieve all season. I mean, just a freeway to the end zone, especially if you're running the football. So you knew that there were going to be a lot of points. That felt honestly like one of the easiest over-unders of the year. It felt like betting in Iowa under at 29 or 30. You're just like, hey, death taxes and Iowa's unders under 30. And USC and Washington hitting over. But anyways, though, Caleb Williams was 27 for 35, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns. And he ran the ball really well, too, picked up some crucial third downs and all that. And then you had USC. They ran the ball for 203 yards, which their fans had been asking for. They're like, Lincoln Riley, you've had Joel Klatt tell us, oh, this offense is really built upon running the football. Well, that ain't what's been happening, despite their running backs having a good yards per carry. But then they came in this game and ran for a total of 203 yards as a team, most of which by Stanford transfer Austin Jones. So you would have thought, okay, wait, so it must have been Michael Penix that went out and scorched this USC defense. Like, he was good, 2 touchdowns, a pick, but he didn't even throw for 300 yards. It was Dylan Johnson who was the star of the game. And you're like, wait, I haven't really heard that name. Yeah, because the man rushed 26 times for 256 yards and 4 touchdowns, which almost doubled his season total. Doubled his season total. And this was a problem for USC fans because they're like, hold up, how does this make sense? How are we paying our coach, Lincoln Riley, this much money? And everybody sees what the problem is with this team, that the defense is bad, and we're not getting it fixed. So they've been calling for Alex Grinch's job for a very long time. But before we even get to that, I got to give credit to Kalen DeBoer, who's Washington's head coach, Grubb, who is their offensive coordinator, who I think will get a big-time head coaching job after this season. They did the opposite of what Washington has been known for the last 2 seasons with Michael Penix as their quarterback, which is high-flying, throwing the ball, 350, 450 yards per game. That's not what they did. They came out and they ran the football because they knew what it was. They knew what it was. They knew they had an opportunity to be special. But regardless of the offense, everything else, the biggest thing that was talked about in this game, there were so many comments about this man, Caleb Williams, when he was crying in his mom's arms after the 52-42 loss to Washington. And even more about him saying in the post-game press conference that he wanted to go home and cuddle with his dog and watch some of his favorite TV shows. When you hear that, right, you're like, wow, that's so precious. That's so cute. But do I want my football quarterback? Is that the way I want him to talk? He's soft. You can say what you want. But if your personal team success was in the hands of a man that cared more about standing by his terrible defensive coordinator than he does about winning games, you might need a hug from your mama and a puppy to cuddle with. So let's get that out of the way. Nothing wrong with Caleb Williams crying, because one thing is, at least he cares. Because there are some quarterbacks who be like, hey, yo, I played well. It ain't my fault, baby. Let's move on to the next. Out partying. And he's like, nah, man, I got to deal with this. I got to let this sink in. And it hurts. But now the other part is, I don't love my quarterback needing to be consoled on the sideline. If he goes in the locker room, do it, because on some level, your quarterback has to be the person that galvanizes your team when the chips are down and when stuff hurts the absolute most. You got to go in the locker room. Maybe not right after the game, but the next day. You got to talk to the team like, hey, yo, let's get this together. Here's what we need to do. And they need to have confidence in you that your emotions won't be all over the place. And I do think that that's part of Caleb's game that he's going to have to get better at before he gets to the NFL, because you're not dealing with your college teammates anymore. You're dealing with grown men who have families, mortgages, wives, kids, parental problems, all sorts of stuff that everybody has in real life. And there's a different element to leading those guys. But do I see anything wrong with Caleb Williams crying? No. But I would have told my son, I'd have told him, hey, son, of course, I love that his mom covered his face and all of that. But to protect him on some level, I'd be like, yo, son, let's get in the locker room. Take care of that in the locker room. And it's not being insensitive. It's just, we do understand that this is a business. And optics matter to you, your teammates, all of that stuff. But, But his coach, Lincoln Riley, they went into this season knowing that the main criticism against this team was that their defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, was a liability. And he knew that. And he did nothing about it. And he's continued to do nothing about it until yesterday, when it was announced that Alex Grinch had been fired. Because this Trojans defense is ranked 124 out of 133 in the nation. They've given up 10 rushing touchdowns in the last 2 games. 10. There are 22 college football teams that don't even have 10 rushing touchdowns yet this season as an entire team. Not giving up, but actually have 10 rushing touchdowns. And Lincoln Riley, who has benefited greatly, he's benefited greatly from Caleb Williams' special talent while seemingly actively rooting against Caleb's success because their defense has been so bad because they haven't been able to rely on the defense, not even a little bit. And USC fans, they've been furious, absolutely furious. And Alex Grinch getting fired this week is the thing that their fans are going to be happy about, but is this going to fix the problem? Because another defensive coordinator has to be hired. There's got to be philosophical matchups between Lincoln Riley and his offense and the way that they do defense. That means how they practice, the physicality allowed in practice. This is not just a hire. This is a fundamental change that has to happen. And there are some names, which we'll talk about later, that he should be thinking of. But Caleb Williams, I don't look at this kid as soft. I think he's being gaslit by his own situation, just like USC fans are. Now, I do believe, too, that him keeping Alex Grinch for so long was a middle finger almost to the USC fan base. Because he's like, listen, I got the answers. I got the answers. You do not have to listen. You do not have to listen. I got the answers. And turns out he was wrong in this situation. But now he's finally fired Alex Grinch after 3 losses. He's got one of the worst defenses in college football. And this is where I tell you that stats lie. Because when you looked at this USC defense last year, you knew it wasn't good last year. But they had so many turnovers. They were opportunistic. That is the term that is used for bad defenses all the time. Opportunistic. Yeah, they're opportunistic. Yeah, all right. Well, and then at the beginning of this season, they talked about sacks. They talked about pressure. But we could see it. We could see the holes and the problems in this defense. But they kept pointing to all these stats. Oh, the stats say no. The stats may say one thing. Our eyes are telling us they can't stop the run. They're okay against the pass, but they give up way too many points and way too many yards per play and way too many explosives. But the question is, does this firing at this point in time help them for Oregon and for UCLA, which are their last 2 games? Now on to LSU, because this is another situation where this team is not set up in a way that you would have expected an LSU team to be set up. Like USC, known for playing good defense, in addition to having good offense, but they have been physical. Like that's their brand and their history. LSU putting out great defenses. They hadn't necessarily put out the best offenses in the whole world, aside from 2019, obviously, which is one of the greatest LSU teams and college football teams of all time. But historically, they put out so many NFL players, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And you have Brian Kelly, who hasn't been supporting his quarterback, Jaden Daniels, with a running game or a defense. And LSU lost their 3rd game of the season, this one to Alabama 42-28. And in LSU's losses, Jaden Daniels is averaging 11 carries a game, while the rest of the LSU roster combined is averaging 15 carries a game. Why are you using this skinny man as a battering ram? And I know some of them are scrambles, but still. And it's not like LSU can't run the ball. Their top 5 running backs have over 1,100 yards and are averaging 5.6 yards a carry. That means run the ball more. But their pass game has been so effective that that's what they've been leaning on, which actually ends up with Jaden Daniels dropping back more and then having to run the ball more and taking some of the biggest hits that we've ever seen week in and week out. And in the game this weekend, he got knocked out of the game. However, it was on a pass play. But this was obvious where things are headed because there's only so many hits that quarterbacks can take. No matter whether you're built like Cam Newton or Josh Allen, there's only so many hits that they can take as well. And it's actually a shame that some of the best quarterbacks in college football, Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, aren't going to be showcased in the college football playoff because their head coaches didn't get the parts of the game together, particularly on defense, that they needed. Oregon gets it. Other teams get it. Those two really have to get it. Now, some more coaching stuff, right? Because Deion Sanders in Colorado, they are having consequences, boy, consequences. Because this week, Deion Sanders, he decided that Colorado averaging 17 more points per game in 2023 at 32 points per game than they did in 2022 was not enough. So he demoted offensive coordinator Sean Lewis. He cited protecting the quarterback, not being able to run the ball, that there were issues that needed to be changed, right? Now, on one hand, I can't decide if this is consistent logic from Deion Sanders or if it's inconsistent. Because yes, you could watch this team and say, oh, they're not doing a good job of protecting the quarterback. They're not playing good defense. They aren't running the ball well. But they are scoring a lot of points per game. So there's maybe some things that need to change on offense, maybe screens, quick games, something like that. But he did not do anything to address the defensive coordinator position or anything like that. So the good news for Deion is that he has the same energy with his players and his coaches. So where he talked about a week ago, hey, yo, I got to go get new players out of the portal for his offensive line. Well, he's like, yo, if I don't think the coach is doing their job, you can get up out of here too. You can scram. And him demoting Sean Lewis was that. Now, on the other hand, saying that the players aren't giving you what you want, it's usually an indication that the coaching is not where you need it to be and vice versa, because those things work hand in hand. And this week I talked about that in the video that I talked about Deion Sanders and his comments about needing a new offensive line and getting in the portal and replacing them. And Pat Narduzzi's comments last week about his team, that they lost a lot of good players and apparently they didn't replace them with good ones. So for Pat Narduzzi and for Deion Sanders, they need to be Coach Prime, Coach Narduzzi, not Collector Prime and Collector Narduzzi. But I thought that Narduzzi's comments were a little bit worse, but you guys can go check out that video on the YouTube as well. But what was the result, though, of Deion Sanders handing over his offense to Pat Shurmur instead of Sean Lewis against a very stout UCLA defense? Well, the answer is clear. It was the second lowest total offensive yardage output of the year, the lowest completion percentage of the year, the third lowest pass yards of the year, and -7 yards rushing. Yes, -7 yards rushing. And only 31 positive yards if you remove the negative plays from Shedeur Sanders taking sacks. Because this week was atrocious. This week was absolutely atrocious to watch Colorado on offense. 3 points on offense through 3 quarters. But then they got a safety in the third quarter, so that's not an offensive point. So they had 5 points going into the fourth quarter. And then 2 garbage time touchdowns to get to 19. I believe that Deion Sanders, with this move with Sean Lewis, got more in dad mode than coach mode. And that coaching your kid can cause a blind spot. I've done it. It definitely can cause a blind spot because you see things that need to be fixed, but the cause and how and why to fix it is not necessarily the right thing. And you're not necessarily going to have the same patience to get that fixed as you are other things to get fixed. So Sean Lewis became an issue in terms of not getting the offense fixed with the expeditiousness that Deion Sanders wanted, because his kid is out there taking hit after hit after hit and getting absolutely just beat up. And he knows when he talks to him, He's taking painkiller injections, everything else to be out there on the field. And as a dad, that's going to cause you to have some sort of reaction, which I'm not faulting Deion Sanders for. This is just the reality of the things that happen. Now, I want to talk about a team, too, that we have not talked about since they played Colorado, and that is Nebraska. Did you guys see the Arizona Wildcats celebrating win number 6? Yeah, you probably did. They were super excited this week after beating UCLA. They're going bowling for the first time since 2017. They're 19 points away from being 9-0, and it's a testament to what Jed Fish is doing, and it shows that the right people making the right investments are getting the right thing done. Now, over in Nebraska, they have changed people multiple times. But do they have the right people in the building now? I'm not talking about necessarily the head coach. I'm saying, do they have the right people and right processes in place? And I believe that they are trending in the right direction, similarly to Arizona. Even though that they have not been to a bowl game since 2016. And like Arizona with Kevin Sumlin, they thought that they had the right answer with Scott Frost a couple years ago when they hired him. Didn't work out. And under Matt Rule, they have improved. But they should have been celebrating this past weekend too. They went into the game 5-3 and then took a bad 20-17 loss at Michigan State. But when they get to 6 wins and get bowling, they need to be excited and celebrate this at Nebraska because it is progress, not perfection. You got to be moving in the right direction. And anybody that thought that this was going to turn into a 9-win team this year, 10-win team, listen, we know how this works. It takes a minute to build, and sometimes your first couple of years, particularly your first year, does not look like you want it to go. But them being in a bowl game, that would be a big win for Nebraska. That fan base who's been selling out year after year after year, despite nothing to cheer for, that'll be something to cheer for. And when you look at their remaining games against Maryland, Wisconsin, and Iowa, there's no guarantees there, but they got to at least scratch one of those across. And with the Big Ten adding UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon, for all or any faults that those teams have, they're right now all in a better place than Nebraska. And their fans are going to need even more evidence to see that things are going in the right direction as soon as possible. Now, the last thing up on the show today, the college football playoff rankings came out this week. And the initial rankings have Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Michigan 3, Florida State 4, Washington 5, Oregon 6, Texas 7, Alabama 8, Oklahoma 9, which we know that they're gone, and Ole Miss 10. And you might be thinking, oh, this is the first ranking. A lot could change. That's what people tell you all over the time. Oh, listen, don't get too reactive about it. They could change. But as Lee Corso says, not so fast, my friend. Obviously, Michigan and Ohio State still have to play each other, and the loser is likely to be on the outside looking in, and then we don't even know what the hell is going on with Michigan and if there will be some punishments for the Connor Stallion stuff and anything like that. But only 3 times since the inception of the College Football Playoff Committee rankings has a team that was outside the top 8 on the initial ballot even made the College Football Playoff. And Oklahoma had done it, but this ain't the year that that's going to happen. And in 2020, that's the only season where all 4 teams that were ranked in the top 4 actually made the College Football Playoff. But that was an asterisk season because everybody didn't play enough games and everything like that. But here is the part where don't bother with the initial rankings doesn't hold any weight. Because in every other season, outside of 2014, the very first year of the College Football Playoff, at least 2 of the teams in the initial top 4 have been included in the Final 4. So that's 8 years in a row of at least 2 teams in the initial top 4 making the playoffs. And that assuming that this holds true for a 9th straight year, Here are the top 2 teams that are in the current top 4 that I believe have the best shot of hanging on to their spot. Number 1 is Georgia. Think the SEC lends itself to them being able to hold on to their spot. And number 2, Florida State. Florida State has a very legitimate shot. The ACC, of course, they got to get through likely Louisville in the ACC championship, or it could be North Carolina. But whoever it is, I believe that Georgia and Florida State have the best shot of hanging on to those 2 spots, because history is the best predictor of the past. And you guys, this is our inaugural college football show that we're going to be doing likely on Sundays after the games. Please share it with a friend, tell them, and consume all the rest of the content. Leave comments, everything else on the YouTube channel here. Thank you guys. Peace out.